This is your host, Mark Lieberman, the host of the radio show, The World According to Mark, broadcasting through the station of WPVM FM LP 103.7 on your dial in Asheville, North Carolina, and streaming globally on WPVMFM.org. Today's show is a show devoted to a topic which has been in the news, but has been pushed aside to a great extent by a lot of more pressing national news, one would think. But it's about gun violence, and it actually really does feed into a lot of things that we've been seeing, both state and federal, in terms of the misuse of guns, people's restating their rights to gun ownership as a result of the Second Amendment. So we're going to have a discussion with three people who I'm happy to have on the show: John Owens, Doreen Blue, and Cece Blackburn. Thank you all for coming on the show today.
Thank you for inviting us.
So I'm going to give a very short intro, and then I'll let each of you speak for yourself. John Owens has had an interesting career in not as a broadcaster, but in broadcasting. He's also a photographer and has a lot of other interests. But his reason for being here today is because he himself was a victim of gun violence. And we'll talk about that episode in his life, but more importantly, what it has meant to him and the anti-violence movement with respect to guns. Doreen Blue is a Henderson County resident who has been prolific in terms of community theater. She's written, she's done a lot of things off stage, and very supportive of the Hendersonville Community Theater and others. And she and a friend, Eileen Douglas, wrote a play, which we'll get into, called A Hole in My Heart. And my third guest is Cece Blackburn, who is a self-described political activist, writer, speaker, volunteer, and a very concerned American. And all of those things are important, but she was also involved in playing characters in the film, which we're going to talk about, A Hole in My Heart. So again, let me just move quickly and say that I'm happy again that we're discussing this really important topic, and we're going to try to discuss it in a way which educates and doesn't cross any partisan divides. Let me just start out by saying the issue of gun violence seems to come and ebb and flow in terms of its importance in the national media. Sadly, it seems to become most important following a gun atrocity, typically a mass murder, and again, even more unfortunate, mass murders at schools and churches and synagogues involving a lot of innocent people, including a lot of young people. And it does seem as though our politicians are concerned enough to be outspoken about it. And there has been some movement towards meaningful regulation and legislation. But just as much as we have optimism, and we're going to talk about that things might be moving in a more positive direction, things get stalled out. And so I'm not going to talk further about it. I want to introduce John, who I mentioned was himself a victim of gun violence. And your story is told on a website, which I'll let you talk about. And you recently penned an op-ed which appeared in the January edition of the Citizen Times in Asheville. So John, start us off.
Well, thanks again for inviting us to your show, Mark. My first interaction with gun violence was extremely personal. It happened in 2005. And I'm a very atypical case, not your normal case, but it just shows you how widespread and gun violence can happen anywhere at any time. I was at that time working for a video production company in Detroit, Michigan, and it was a beautiful sunny afternoon, and I had to pick up a at that point, I had to pick up a videotape at a television station that I had worked for 20 years. And then once I did that, I was going to go have dinner with my mother and my wife and child, and uh, enjoy a nice weekend. Um, I had walked into a station which had a little holding area before the main doors that they buzz you in to go inside. And I was trying to do this very quickly, parked my car, ran into this holding area, um, knocked at the door because I knew the receptionist for many years. And the receptionist kind of looked at me and started going like this. And I'm like, why are you telling me that? I didn't understand. And I knocked again. I'm kind of going like this, and she's still going like this. And so I assumed that they didn't want me to come through the front door for some reason. Maybe I'll have to go around to the back door.
Hmm.
And as soon as I turned around, and I did not notice that there was really another person in this holding area at the time, um, I was shot point blank um, by a person that had a mental illness, which I found out later. Um, I, fell to the floor in intense pain that I cannot even begin to describe, that came over me, and was, just a really kind of one of those wrong place, wrong time kind of moments. From there, though, I was very lucky in the sense that, I frankly, the pain was so intense, I wanted to pass out, but I didn't pass out, and fought through it, which probably is the reason that I'm able to talk to you here today. I survived this. An ambulance came fairly quickly, took me to probably the best trauma center in the state of Michigan, which happened to only be about 15 minutes away from where I was shot. And the people there saved my life. Uh, I am one of 200 people a day in this country that are shot and survive a gun shooting. 100, more than 100 people a day do not survive, but I am considered one of the lucky ones. I didn't go without some damage. I have a spinal cord injury, which limits my ability to walk, but I can walk, so I'm lucky. But ever since that time, I have used a wheelchair. I say that the last time I had a pain-free moment in my life was April 15th, 2005 at 4:30 p.m. And ever since then, I've been in constant pain uh, in my legs. Um, and gun violence this is not just about me. This is about my greater family that had to go through this experience also. My wife, my child, uh, my mother at the time. And it affected, just turned our life totally around. I was in inpatient rehab. Uh, I never thought I would walk again, but there are some terrific people out there that got me walking, and it took a long time. I was outpatient rehab, and this happened in April, and I had a lot of health setbacks throughout the year. But I made it through and actually went back to work the following February, and had really up until my retirement a couple of years ago, had been working ever since, but using a wheelchair to get around, and dealing with all the other sort of issues. Since I moved to Hendersonville, which was about 5 years ago, I got involved with Moms Demand Action for Gun Sense, which is a national gun prevention organization with groups in cities, not only all around North Carolina, but all around the country. It's a grassroots organization, and even though it's called Moms Demand Action for Gun Sense, we have moms, dads, grandparents, military veterans, gun owners, and other people like myself who have been affected by gun violence in one way or the other, whether they've had a family member that has been involved in a domestic violence situation. We have a member of our group whose daughter was killed at the Virginia Tech mass shooting several years ago, and has been very active in this area. So we have the whole gamut. And since that time, I've also been involved with Everytown for Gun Safety as a survivor. And what that does is it connects survivors from all around the country to use our voices in this movement to try to get better gun sense legislation passed. And I've heard their stories. And, you know, we are able to share a lot of their same experiences that we've been able to get through. And it's a really powerful group to be part of because you see the resiliency of gun violence survivors, you know, that have lost children and parents and brothers and sisters. And I'm so glad to be part of this group and use our voice to hopefully get some laws in place that make it safer for us to walk around the streets. So that's sort of a little bit about background and how I got involved in this. Not of any choice in the matter, but I'm so glad to be part of this organization.
So before we talk to Doreen and Cece, let me just say two things are notable about your experience. First of all, a lot of the emphasis about guns and gun violence focuses on the people who have not survived. You are a survivor, but what you went through pain-wise and rehabilitation-wise and the impact on your family was more than excruciating. And so when people talk about the scope of the problem, we should be considerate of not just the people who were unfortunately fatalities, but everybody, including those who managed to survive, but not in your case, 100% in one piece. I mean, you're in one piece, but you have the elements of it as a constant reminder, mentally as well as physically. And the second thing, which I'm assuming from your discussion about how it happened, is you had zero notion of who the perpetrator was. You apparently later found out that this person had a mental illness, and it's not even clear why this person had a gun or was shooting, and why was he there for robbery or was he there for revenge? Did you just happen to be a bystander? And I'm sure that again is sort of another element of this that we sometimes don't focus on.
Well, in my case, I did obviously learn a lot because I survived. The person that came to the station did have a severe mental illness. He had voices in his head that was telling him that the television station was transmitting signals to him, and he felt he needed to go there. The television station was very familiar with his face. He had already assaulted a couple of employees before that. They had a picture of him at the front desk, so they knew he was a threat. That's the reason the receptionist told me to leave the building. They had no idea that he had a gun that day. So he was a threat. He was arrested shortly thereafter and is been in prison. He will come up for parole this year, I believe. You know, as far as the gun, which was focused on, they went back and found that the gun was purchased at a gun show in the suburbs. Often people point to the fact that, you know, why are there so many violent crimes in cities, you know, where, you know, it's very restrictive in terms of being able to buy a gun. I mean, there are no gun stores in Detroit or inner city Chicago, but in the surrounding suburbs, it's very easy to go out and buy a gun. And in my case, the gun was purchased by a registered gun owner at that gun show. He said that the gun was stolen from his house, which is a very likely thing that might have happened, because thousands upon thousands of guns are stolen out of homes and cars every day and then end up in the wrong hands. And that's the reason that we always, when moms talks about, safe storage, gun locks, we pass out gun locks at our events because too many guns are lying around in people's homes that they purchase for self-defense, yet they can either be stolen and end up in the wrong arms, or in the worst case, kids will pick them up and there's unintentional shootings. They'll be playing around with them and shoot a friend or shoot somebody, and this happens on a daily basis. The
Okay.
other thing the police told me was that the gun, he might have been actually buying guns and then reselling them in Detroit. And though they had no proof to bring a case against him, but they say that is done a lot. People purchase guns at these gun shows, go into the inner cities where there's a market on the streets for them. They'll resell them. Who knows how many times this gun might have been resold before it ended up in the hands of the person that shot me. But it just shows just sort of how a purchase of one gun that might have been for self-defense could end up in the hands of somewhere else in the commission of a crime, and either cost somebody their life or somebody a life-altering injury.
Okay. Well, I want to talk about and get back to talking about where we are in this country about in terms of guns. I mean, obviously, your story exemplifies that one of the problems in terms of gun violence is there's a ton of guns out there, and they can fall into the wrong hands and they can be traded and so on and so forth. But I want to start off talking on the issue of the play itself, not the issue, the topic, A Hole in My Heart. And let me just introduce, for those who are just tuning in, we have John Owens, who you just heard from, talking about his experience as a victim of gun violence, and Doreen Blue, who is a theater person and a playwright, and who put together a film, A Hole in My Heart, which we're going to talk about next, and CC Blackburn, who was one of the significant actors in that production. So Doreen, if you don't mind, tell us about this play. How did you get the idea for it? What was your inspiration? Were you were you an activist in terms of the movement against gun violence? Just give us a sort of a background on that.
Okay, thanks for having us. I think after Newtown, I first attended one of the moms' meetings, and I had written up, and I enjoyed hearing all the stories, and said, we have to do more. More people have to hear these stories and be moved by them. And the word of joy, you know what I mean by that. Anyway, so I decided that I had written a play, and one of the people at the meetings said, you should write a play about gun violence, gun survivors. And I was like, I don't think so. But the more I thought about it, I wrote some little stories down, and it just, all the school shootings, things kept happening and happening, and we had to get out. The vehicle that I know how to do is theater. I'm not an actor. That's why we have wonderful people like Cece. But wrote the play, and Eileen Douglas, who had suggested it, I said, help me. And she did. She edited, and we expanded it to, I think, 25 characters. Some of the stories were real stories. We tried to get a very diverse group of actors, and we actually did try for like teenagers, kind of 25, 35. In my age group, I know a lot of older actors, but we wanted a more diversity. So we were going to do it live, had it all scripted, and we were going to do auditions, and then COVID happened.
So let me ask you this, if I can interject something. As we'll talk about, and Cece can talk about it specifically as well, the film, I guess you could still call it a play. It was originally conceived as a play, is not an interactive dialogue, or there's not a set piece with 2 or 3 actors interacting. Was that how you had written it initially, or that's your initial conception, or did you make the modification to be a series of monologues to adapt to the pandemic environment?
It was always monologues. That's kind of my style of writing. But with COVID, and it was supposed to be a support group, and then each actor would get up and tell the story. And, because of COVID, we tried to do it on Zoom, and everybody's quality of Zoom was so different that that really didn't work. But we practiced, and we coached, and got the actors together, and then went to John, and John, we taped everybody very safely doing their monologues. We wanted them to be just faces, and John worked his magic, and Cece worked her magic as an actor, and that's what happened.
Okay, well, Cece, that's a lead into you. So you play, I think, 3 separate
I do.
actors and have 3 separate monologues. And I guess so people know what you are saying, which is what Doreen and her co-writer Eileen had put together and put down on paper, is not the actual words of actual people. Is that correct?
That's correct.
But basically you're putting yourself in the position of a mother or sister, or all the actors, and basically telling a short story. So tell us a little bit about that, and then with the miracle of video, we'll try to see if we can play a couple of clips. So go ahead.
Each one of the characters, as Doreen mentioned, each one of them is pulled from real life. Each one is something that had happened, has happened, and the characters came. Doreen was able to put words in their mouths that spoke to their case. Each one of them has been impacted by gun violence. And I know you probably mentioned at some point that this is Gun Violence Awareness Month, which is one of the reasons why we are trying to get the word out there. Because like John and Doreen, I became involved with the moms group because my son is a cop. And because he's a cop, I worry for his safety. And I worry that there are a lot of guns out there in the hands of people who don't necessarily know how to use them or have nefarious motives. So I loved it because there were people from both sides. You have gun owners, you've got folks who say, no, I'd never own a gun ever, but the dialogue is there. And it's really a wonderful thing. And this is just a manifestation of that dialogue. By being able to give life to these people who have suffered so, in many ways, I think it's playing almost better this way than it would have on stage, because, as they said, you've got our faces, and we're trying very hard to tell everyone what it is that has happened to us and how it has had such an important, dreadful. How it's made us who we are today.
Well, let's see if we can pull up a video on this, because everything that you're saying, I think in our minds we can visualize it, but it's much better if we actually see it. So let's see if we can get a video going here.
The hospital asked if we wanted his organs to be donated. It was painful thinking of him being cut open. Nothing compared to what he went through. It tears me up inside just to think of it. I can't cope. I secretly think of taking my own life just to escape this one. But I am not that brave. And I won't be the cause of this kind of pain anyone else. Maybe there is a place we will be together again and play some hoops. The thought keeps me going. Until then, I'll have to wait and see. Please, pray for me.
I go to my synagogue to pray. It's our sanctuary, a place to be one with God and like people who share our faith. You never expect to see a shooter among you. Fear for your life? We have. Why my people? Again, haven't we been persecuted long enough? We need to live in peace, in harmony, and the world needs to be kinder, not more divided. We can't continue like this.
You win. Your Second Amendment rights and your your gun laws, well, my medical experience is no match for that. You know, when we were kids, we used to play cowboys and Indians, shoot 'em up, but we knew it was make-believe. Didn't make us gun crazy. What's going on with this country now? Do you know that there were well over 15,000 gun deaths in 2019 alone? You ever seen the damage a bullet can do to a body? Well, I have, and it ain't pretty. I've been a damn good nurse for over 40 years, but this is a challenge for the good Lord himself. I'm done. I give up. See, my hands are up. Don't shoot me.
So that was pretty riveting. And the interesting part of it is it seems so affecting, and all we're doing is listening to some highly skilled actors. And again, Doreen, before we broke for the clip, you had mentioned that while the words coming from these actors who are depicting people at the scene of these various atrocities, those words are words that you basically penned yourself. It's not based upon an interview or a diary or anything of that nature, but it's things that you thought people might say in the aftermath of a very violent episode. Is that a correct statement?
Yes, and 4 of the stories are real stories, and they're telling their own personal stories. You'll notice that each of the actors has about 3 parts. So a lot of people who have watched it have said, "Oh, I thought it was the real people telling those stories." But then when you see an actor come up again, you realize they're. But we tried to make a collection of anybody, and somebody could relate to one of those people in their family. We weren't at Las Vegas or Pulse nightclub, but you can still feel. And I think the point of the whole film is to get people moved enough to realize that this is a problem and we need to do something right away.
So this production, hearing a little static, this production was streamed I believe it was streamed under the auspices of the Hendersonville Community Theater. If I'm, or perhaps not. It was streamed, and you did it as John pointed out earlier, because this is the month in which we call it a national gun violence, anti-gun violence. What's the actual phrase? John, I'm not hearing John.
Maybe you muted.
Yeah, one of the things that we definitely tried to do was put it out during, this is Gun Survivor Month, but it also is National Gun Survivor Week back at the beginning of February. And that's when we were rolling it out. And we used any sort of publicity factor to so people could access the show. That's the reason I wrote the op-ed that appeared not only in the Asheville Citizen Times, but the Times News in Hendersonville. Flat Rock Playhouse sent it out to their subscribers to let them know about it. Hendersonville Community Theater sent it out to their subscribers to know about it. It was in the Mountain Express. So, and then I shared it through Facebook and Twitter with other people that are certainly in the gun violence prevention movement across the country. So people could access it at that time. And it's at holeinmyheartplay.com. And if you go to holeinmyheartplay.com, you can get a little bit of background and also view the play that Doreen and Eileen had put together. And also we had encouraged people to make a contribution to a local foundation that supports gun violence victims, the Riley Howe Foundation Fund.
Riley Howe, could you?
Riley Howe,
Okay.
Howell. And of course, he has a very tragic and compelling story that he's a real tragic reminder of how gun violence, again, can affect any family at any time, anywhere, whether it be on a campus, church, workplace, Las Vegas nightclub, you name it, schools. We unfortunately have seen it here in this country. And I think that's what Doreen has done such a great job with, in her play, is capturing all those various elements of gun violence, not just the ones you ordinarily think about, like Newtown, but like the nurse that Cece played in that last clip. And I think what makes that very apropos is that the American Medical Association and the Emergency Physicians Association have come out and called gun violence a national health emergency, and that really there should be a public response to it, but again, we don't generally say it in those words, but the people in the medical association that see in their hospitals these tragic gun violence incidents, they obviously are on the front lines and know what this is like, especially in our inner cities.
Well, I want to commend Doreen and Cece and you, John, for helping to put it together. You basically took something which could, just as monologues, not be effective, because in this time in which theaters are shut down and people are resorting to virtual theater and so on and so forth, sometimes it doesn't make it. But the writing and the acting and the way it's portrayed is riveting, but it's also universal. You pick out, a number of victims or survivors of gun tragedies that were real, and you mention them, and again, the pity and the shame of it is so often it occurs in environments where you just don't expect it to happen. Obviously, John, you didn't expect it to happen at your station, but schools, churches.
Mark,
Yes.
I think John did a masterful job at pulling everything together and putting clips in between and adding footage and all kinds of things that really, I learned a lot. I was watching some of it and I said, wow, did that happen?
So, can,
Sometimes people just aren't aware of these things.
so can people, just to be clear, can people see this now?
Yes.
Or, okay.
Yeah, holeinmyheartplay.com. You go to that website, and again, it is, you can watch the play. You can make a donation if you are so moved to the Riley Howe Foundation Fund.
John, do you want to tell them who Riley Howell was, just in case there's folks
Sure.
out there who don't know?
Well, Riley Howe was a young man who was shot and killed in 2019 at UNC Charlotte, trying to save his other classmates in a active gun shooting situation. Riley saw what was happening, put himself in front of the gunman to try to wrestle the gun away, and unfortunately was tragically shot himself. His story was so tragic and compelling. It really became a national story. He was featured on CNN, and it was just such a terrible loss. And we've gotten to know his family. His family has attended some of our events. His parents live in Waynesville, and his grandmother lives out near Edneyville, and they're just wonderful people. And and to be with them and to see what they've gone through. And I've met many times with the mother of Riley Howe, and it's just been a really hard thing for this family to accept, because this was really a wonderful young man who had his whole life ahead of him, and was tragically struck. And it's taken a while for them. I mean, they had to mourn, and obviously they'll mourn the rest of their lives for this loss, but they have become very active. They started this foundation fund. They wanted to do something to help people that were going through some of the same things they were going through. They wanted to support organizations that, support gun violence prevention. And Natalie has become a spokesperson in her own right to tell her story, that hopefully it touches other people in a way that makes them think stronger about how we can have better gun prevention legislation passed in the state or federally, whatever it takes, because we shouldn't lose another Riley Howe or any other young man or person to gun violence in this country. It's just a tragic thing, and we need to take measures to stop it.
So you can either look at this topic in the micro level, which I think is what the play focuses on, making it personal, and it has a dramatic effect, and people who see it and those who've acted in it, walk away and they're moved, and they might also be moved to activism at a grassroots level. But I want to look at it, and I know we're not going to get too political here, but you can't help but get somewhat political. In your op-ed, John, that you wrote, you cite a bunch of statistics, and I don't know if you remember it, but I'm looking at, you cite some website called Gun Violence Archive, which said that in 2020 alone, more than 19,000 people were killed in shootings and firearm related incidents. Now, compared to COVID numbers, that might not sound like a lot, but this is a number that repeats itself every year and goes up. And that 2020 figure, we don't know the number for, well, that obviously, I don't know if that went to the end of the year, but that number of 19,000, according to your op-ed piece, was the highest death toll in over 20 years. You also reported, based upon some statistics you looked at, the incidence of domestic violence and gun suicide, which we haven't even really touched on, as well as unintentional gun violence has also risen. And then again, just to put this in macro perspectives, firearms are now the leading cause of death for American children and teens. And and then you ask the question, well, why is this happening, and how effective are the messaging points that you're putting in this film and others in grassroots movements and stemming the tide. And then you have to recognize, again, looking back at your op-ed, John, 2020, you say there was a record high for gun sales. 23 million guns were sold. And some people have speculated, some of the so-called experts, that part of that's because of the pandemic. I'm not really sure how those two work together. I mean, pandemic, you get a virus. Why do you need a gun for that? And some of it is because of the racial justice protests. And, I'm guessing that some of it is because of the folks who've been victims, people of color, possibly went out to buy guns so they can protect themselves from incidents of police violence. And again, I'm not stating this as a partisan principle, but you have all this going on. And at the same time, these grassroots movements that you're talking about are catching on. And because of the able spokesman of all three of you and folks that you interact with, the message hopefully will turn, particularly as you make it more personal. But I mentioned before we got on air that I had looked at the internet about gun registration and gun violence and so on and so forth. And there are a ton of websites, from gun sales websites or Second Amendment rights issues, and people are saying, okay, we don't want any government intrusion into the right to have a gun. We are not even happy with the amount of registration and regulations we have presently, and we don't want any more, and any efforts to do something is just a slippery slope, and they're eventually going to take our guns away. So I'm not asking you all to be political spokespersons on this, but how does that make you feel at the time in which you're trying to evoke a sense of reasonableness by letting people know how serious this problem is? And I'll take questions or comments from any of you.
I'll let
Mark?
Cece or Doreen
sorry.
talk first. Yeah.
Okay, well, Doreen, you got something?
No, Cece, go ahead.
Okay, well, I was just going to say, as you were speaking, I realized that the one thing that all of the reasons for purchasing guns have in common, the one tie through, is fear. You don't have a bunch of people saying, oh, I want to learn how to hunt, so let me go out and buy a rifle. You've got people who are saying, I'm afraid, therefore I'm going to purchase a gun. So at some point in our society, we have to start addressing the fear. And there has been a lot of talk about how this problem is predominantly with mental facilities and having to have better mental institutions. And yeah, but it's going to take money. Certain things have got to be addressed, and we've got to stop looking at the smoke and start looking at the fires.
Okay, Doreen?
I think we tried to, in the play, educate people as far as what the NRA has done, and the message, hopefully, out there, especially for moms, is we don't want to take anybody's guns away. We want them to be stored safely, used respectfully, train people. You need a license to fish. But you don't need a license for guns, I guess. I don't know.
Well, it's a complex topic, and I'm going to just help John maybe start off to say, again, this show, we're not going to get into the weeds, is the phrase, of describing gun registration and gun regulation, but suffice it to say that there is legislation on the federal level in terms of registration for guns. Okay, and certain persons are not supposed to be able to buy a gun. A felon, somebody who has a mental illness, they're not supposed to buy from a gun dealer. And a gun dealer is supposed to do a background check. But there are all kinds of loopholes and holes in how that works. The principal one being it only really applies to guns that go from state to state, interstate commerce, because that's where the federal government comes in. And then you have every state has some kind of legislation and regulation respecting guns. Some of them are liberalized, where they're saying, you know, you can carry a concealed weapon, or you can have this kind of gun or that kind of gun. And some states have gone the other way. So one thing seems clear to me is you've got a patchwork of regulations and there's no central theme. So before I let John talk, let me again say I've got John Owens and Doreen Blue and Cece Blackburn, who are all have been involved in a film, A Hole in My Heart, and we're here talking about how to address the gun violence issue. John, you got something to say on this?
Well, as a member, a volunteer for Moms Demand Action for Gun Sense, we say we understand and respect the Second Amendment, but we also believe that you know, it's not unlimited and not without restriction, and we need to find a way. We have a gun violence problem in this country, and it needs to be acknowledged and addressed. And if, you know, for years, Congress could not even pass legislation that would allow for federal funds to study this problem. Why? Because the NRA does not want that to happen, because they believe that, you know, of course, the more statistics, the more background, the more you look at what other countries have done to curb gun violence, is going to restrict the sales of guns to certain people or make it harder for certain people to buy guns. So one, we're in favor of better research on this topic, so we have a better understanding, because it is a very complex topic to take on. Look at what have been successful in some states, what's not successful in other states. What's been successful in some countries that have really curbed gun violence. We have 10 times the rate of other countries like Great Britain or France or Germany or other what we call high income you know, countries in terms of the number of people killed. 84, even though we're a third of the world's population, 84%, we account for 84% of all firearm deaths. 92% of all the women killed by guns, and 97% of children 4 years old and under that are unintentionally shot by guns.
It hasn't been working. So
Yeah, this is not working.
Doreen, I'm going to let you talk, but I do want to get another clip in. But go ahead. You have something to say, it seems like.
Me? No, I didn't
Okay.
have anything.
Well, then it's
I
wrap.
I think her play. I think her play does all the talking.
Speaks for
In
itself.
many respects,
All right,
Doreen, yeah.
All right, let's see if we can get another clip up.
On their first day of school, my parents said they only went with their shiny new shoes and lunch boxes. It's geeky, huh? Now, parents are sent a lengthy list of suggested supplies. Number 2 pencils, folders, color pencils, 2 packs of lined notebook paper, Elmer's glue, and the list goes on and on. What we need now is bulletproof backpacks and Kevlar vests. I mean, seriously. Yesterday, my kid had an active shooter drill at school. She was terrified. She crawled in bed with us that night because she had nightmares. This morning, she asked me if she was going to die at school that day. I was shocked she thought that way. It shouldn't be so freaking scary to be a kid these days. We have to do something.
Our daughter was killed at Parkland. She was a senior at Marjorie Stoneman High, graduating that June. After that horrible day, the school asked us if we wanted to sponsor a scholarship in her name to be given at graduation. Of course, we said yes. But I cannot go to that graduation. I want to see my kid walk across that stage, not everyone else's. Does that make me a horrible, bitter person? I guess a dead kid makes you that way.
So again, another really moving portrayal taken from the vantage point of fathers who've lost children, and fathers whose children have been traumatized and terrified. Again, certainly an important message. And I think what maybe you all are trying to say, and what I think is the takeaway for the audience is, you know, politicians make laws. Politicians are influenced by their constituents. They're also influenced by money and influenced by lobbyists, and the National Riflery Association or National Rifle Association. I'm not a card-carrying member, so I don't have the name exactly right, perhaps. They have, through the years, donated a lot of money to people on the federal level, probably the state level, who are in favor of maintaining looser regulations and less regulations. But they're having their own problems right now. And people, I think, are beginning to have second thoughts about that. And I know that legislators are rated by the NRA and others as to how friendly they are and how supportive they are of the Second Amendment. We're stuck with the Second Amendment, as we all know. It's not going anywhere. And we may be stuck with all the guns that are out there, because all of the issues that you're raising about registration have to do with, presumably guns that people get now, unless there's a buyback or people trade in their guns or there's some other incentive to encourage it. There's just a ton of guns out there. I think the message that you all are speaking to, and I'll give each one of you a chance to chime in, is at the end of the day, it's people, us, voters, that influence whether there's going to be stronger and more significant legislation. And I'll give each of you who want to a chance to speak on that.
Well, I can say for moms, at least, we have been very successful in groups around the country to lobby at the state level to pass what we call common sense gun legislation, or stop what we would call, what we think are bad gun bills. Being able to get a concealed carry weapon without a permit, or allowing teachers to carry guns in schools. We have been very effective in that arena. And we're very effective in getting what we would call gun sense candidates elected to the House of Representatives to be able to affect gun sense legislation. And the House has passed a couple of years ago a very good universal background check legislation bill, which we've been working on, or Gun Sense Activists has been working on since really the shootings in Newtown. It has been stalled in the House because Mitch McConnell in the Senate would not allow it to come up even for a vote. But now I think you're going to see that legislation move forward and hopefully pass and be signed by our president, who is also a candidate that we have supported. Though we are a nonpartisan organization, we just are looking for the best candidates who will at least consider and move forward an agenda that seems to make sense. So we have some gun sense legislation on the books. So we are at an interesting time. I think all this is going to go through the courts. I think that's where now the NRA sees its support moving to, that they want to bring cases up to the courts, and decide. But I'll stop talking here in a second. But I will say that the last major court case that brought up the right to own firearms was brought up, and even though it didn't really go in our favor, the most conservative member of the Supreme Court at that time, Anthony Scalia, wrote in his opinion that, like most rights, the Second Amendment is not unlimited. It is not a right to keep and carry a weapon whatsoever in any manner whatsoever or for whatever purpose. So there are limits, and it's in opinions of the Supreme Court in terms of where we can go with having guns everywhere, and it's legislators and even people that are involved in the courts, they listen to what public opinion is going on. And up until 7 years ago, when Moms Demand Action was really started to form, we didn't have a big voice in this argument. We didn't have a group of survivors lending their voices to tell how gun violence has impacted their lives. Now, many years later, after this movement has started, we have thousands of people. We are very well organized to go into state legislators to talk to people on both sides of the aisle, share our stories, let them know where we feel about the issues. So our voice is now getting into the mainstream, and unfortunately, sometimes it takes an incident. And I put in the play, the Parkland Voice, the parent of the Parkland, which happened 3 years ago. People were energized at that point. A terrible shooting in a high school. We had March for Our Lives. We had thousands of people turn up in Hendersonville, a very conservative county, marching on behalf of those kids. But as time goes on and some of those well-known incidents are not so much in the news, then some of the momentum goes out and people start to feel that nothing's going to change. That's part of the reason I wrote the op-ed. We had a terrible gun violence problem last year, but it was largely unreported, mainly because there weren't any sort of high-profile incidents that would capture the national attention. So
Thank you,
the more
John.
people are involved in this movement, the more people that we feel we can move forward with.
I'm going to take the last word on this and tell people that this production is riveting and everybody should get access. It should be churches, schools, social groups, civic groups. It should be played often enough because I think it pulls at the heartstrings, but it gets people to think beyond living in a basket. So I want to thank my guests, John Owens, Doreen Blue, and Cece Blackburn for being on the show today. And
Thank
we'll
you,
talk more
Mark.
about this later.
Thanks, Mark.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.